afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's Jewish Gen Talk with Dr. Alexander Beider as part of our ongoing series that has taken place throughout the spring. We will get started momentarily. In the meantime, as we always ask, please post a message in the chat and let us know where you are in the world. We have people who registered throughout the world, and we'd love to see where you're from, and we'll get started momentarily. So we have Chiara from Italy. We have Gabriella from Switzerland. Leah is in New York City, where we're based. Deanne is in the United States. David Ovadia in San Francisco, California. Enid in Ambler, Pennsylvania. Anna is in Brazil. Ina Stavitsky is in Arlington, Virginia. Marina is in New York City. Rafael from Atlanta. Sharon from Philadelphia. Micha from rainy Houston, Texas. Yitzchak Kerem from Jerusalem. We have Freda from Honolulu, California. We have, I believe that's Sarah Weil from Jerusalem. We have Sarah from Costa Rica. Pearl from Brooklyn, New York. Judy from Skokie, Illinois. Jonathan in New Jersey. We have Paul Silverstone in Vancouver. And Hazel Boone in Hamilton, Ontario. We have Zev from Niria in Israel. So we have people from all over. We have Barry from Teaneck, New Jersey. And we welcome everybody who is joining us today for today's talk with Dr. Alexander Beider. It's wonderful to be together. We have, if you look in the chat, we have people from all over the world. And it's an honor to be learning together with you. Today's talk will be on the topic of Karaite Judaism. It will be recorded. Since you've all registered and you're here, you will get an you will have advanced access to the recording before it is made public on the JewishGen YouTube channel. So following today's presentation, either later this afternoon or tomorrow, you will receive an email which has a survey if you please give us your feedback on the program, on the topic, if you have suggestions for what you would like to hear in the future, and it will also include a link to the recording and also a registration link for the next session with Dr. Beider. If you have questions, Dr. Beider has graciously offered to answer them. Please post them in the Q&A, which you can access on the bottom of the screen, and we will try to go through as many questions as possible at the end of the session. I will turn on the captions, and with that, I will welcome you all again. Welcome, Dr. Beider. I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I will share my screen and show and slide presentation. Okay. So today's topic is about Karaites in various countries, as it is true, as it was true for my previous lectures as well. It will be, I will first of all cover I will present some summary of what is known about from historical documents, and then we will see what can be learned from names, from the analysis of names about the history and especially migrations and links between different congregations of Karaites of different countries of the world. What I will present today, it corresponds to one chapter of my ongoing project that I hope will be able to complete by the end of this year or at the beginning of the next year, a dictionary of Jewish surnames from the Ottoman Empire and neighboring territories. And so one chapter is covering the Karaites, the history and the names of Karaites in different countries, chapter 11. First of all, let's start with a brief exposure of what is known about Karaites in different countries from the historical data and before going to names and what we can learn about the history from names. So there is no doubt about when this movement started. So the first Karaites appear in the 8th century in Babylonia, so now the territory of Iraq. And it was at that period that a new Jewish sect of Karaites was founded in Babylonia by the most representative person for this movement was a person who is considered usually to be the founder of this movement was called Anan ben David. During the next century, gradually, the Karaites moved, the Karaite Judaism spread to other areas. And so this movement became so widespread that we cannot really speak about a sect at that period. It was a period of that is often called golden age of Karaism, and it became just another variant of Judaism, because in many countries the number of Jews who were professing the Karaite approach to Judaism was very significant. Comparable, even in some places, even there were more Karaites than Jews who were not Karaites. And so Jews who are not Karaites were usually called rabbinites. So what is the biggest difference between Karaite and other Jews? The difference is mainly in their approach. Of course, there are multiple elements on which the standard, the classical Judaism is distinguished from its Karaite version, but the main one is the attitude toward the oral tradition. For classical Judaism, Talmud, as the example of oral tradition, is extremely important. For Karaites, only the Bible, and specifically Torah, is important, and everything which is correspond to oral tradition is rejected, and it's not really studied, and so Karaites, they concentrate their religious studies on the Bible, ignoring Mishnah and Gemara, so Talmud in its totality. In the two centuries that were followed the foundation of this movement, Karaite community appeared outside of Baghdad, outside of Babylonia, and so there were already important communities in the territory of modern Syria, like in the two biggest cities of Aleppo and Damascus, also in the territory of modern Egypt, in the city of Fustat, so what today correspond to Old Cairo, and in Jerusalem. So the movement became really widespread in this area. In some aspects, it was considered to be more rigorous version of Judaism than the classical Judaism. There were some elements, new elements that were introduced that were taken or inspired, at least inspired by Islam. So all these countries where Karaism became important, they were Muslim countries during this period, and Arabic speaking. So since Karaites were their religious studies were aimed only on the Bible, the Karaites scholars became extremely important during this period of Golden Age in the studies of Hebrew grammar, because they were studying the texts of the Bible, and so they took active part in the development of the Nekudot systems, and there were several grammarians which were extremely important at that period who wrote about the Hebrew grammar. In the 11th century, Karaites appear in numerous places of the Byzantine Empire. So we're in the capital city of Constantinople, there was a big community. We also know about communities that appeared in Trebizond. So today it's Trabzon on northeastern Turkey, in Salonika, in Antalya, in the city that today is called Antalya, in Cyprus. So in all these places that at that period belonged to the Byzantine Empire, we know from sources that there were Karaite communities. From where we came? So here there are two possibilities. First possibility is that there were some migrants who came to the territory of Byzantine Empire from Syria, for example. We know that between mid-10th and mid-11th century, Byzantine Empire acquired the territories of modern Syria and part of modern Israel. And so during that part, all this area where were already important communities of Karaites became Byzantine. So this could be one of the reasons of the propagation of this version of Judaism in the Byzantine Empire. And so some people who were already Karaites, they could migrate northward to Byzantine Empire, but the presence of Karaites community was not necessarily related only to migration of people. It could also be, and for surely in some cases it was also related to migrations of ideas. So this version of Karaism could become widespread in different communities, also because Jews who were local, who were living in the Byzantine Empire, some of them, not all of course, but some of them adhered to this movement. Until 60s of 11th century, the patriarchate of this movement was in Jerusalem. After that, it's stopped to be there. And when during the second half of the 12th century, Spanish Jewish traveler Benjamin of Tudela made his famous trip, he noted the presence of Karaites in some places. First of all, in Constantinople, so he noted that there were about 500 of Karaites present there. That corresponded to about 20% of all local Jews. He noted also the presence of about 100 Karaites in Damascus and 40 Karaites in Ashkelon, so today in Israel. What were the development of Karaites Karaite congregation during the next centuries in this area? So during between 16th and 20th century, it was non-even. So, for example, in Cairo, so formerly Fustat, and later became Cairo, the community, one of the oldest Karaite communities prospered. So if at the end of 15th century we know about 150 families, during the 19th century we know of more than 1,000 of persons who lived there, and 100 years later, more than 4,000 of Karaites lived in Egypt, globally speaking, but a large majority of them lived in the capital city in Cairo. And if we consider the centuries, 16th century, 17th century, actually in Cairo and even globally speaking in Egypt, the number of Karaites was larger than the number of non-Karaite Jews. It was only starting with 19th century, and especially, of course, at the turn of 20th century with a large migration of Jews to Egypt from other countries, where the number of non-Karaites became much larger. In Damascus, the situation was different. There was never a big community, but this community, since it was not large, not only it was not large, but it was declining. And if in mid 16th century we know about 36%, during the 18th century in different Arabic documents or Muslim official documents about judgment of what took place in Damascus, we regularly find a reference not only to individual Karaites, but we also find references to a Karaite quarter inside of the city of Damascus. But the community declined dramatically at the end, by the end of the 18th century, and during the first third of the 19th century, we find reference to 1 or 2%, and so the last Karaite known in Damascus is recorded at 1832. In the city of Hit, which is situated not far from Baghdad, so in modern day Iraq, we have a reference to 24 Jews who lived there according to the Turkish tax paying list. But since Turkish Ottoman documents about tax paying were rarely distinguishing between Karaites and other groups of Jews, we don't know whether this person were Karaites or not. But we don't find any reference to non-Karaite Jews in this place in the 19th and 20th century. So in the 19th century, we know about 20 families that were for sure Karaites. And in 1951, we know but 13 families that were still present there. And actually all of them migrated to Israel. And I did not say about Egypt. A large majority of Karaites of Egypt, of Cairo, also migrated to Israel, and their communities are still present, of course, especially in Beersheba and Ashdod. These are the biggest Karaites community in the world today. In Jerusalem, there were never many Karaites. There were very small congregations that was present here just to meet pilgrims who were coming from different communities. And so we know about a few families that lived there in 19th century, 20th century, but not more. Constantinople and later Istanbul became a much more important center for Karaism. So we know from the Turkish tax-paying list of 130 households which were Karaites in 1540, and of them a large majority belonged to what was called Edirne congregation. So Edirne is the Turkish name for the former Byzantine city of Adrianople. And so that means that actually almost all of these families, their ancestors came on their own will, or some of them, if not all, were transferred by Ottomans, together with many other non-Karaite Jews from other places, to Constantinople after the fall of Constantinople and the end of the Byzantine Empire. So in Edirne, there was an important community of Karaites until mid-15th century. And we don't have any information about the Edirne Karaites during the next century. Apparently, all of them were either transferred or came by themselves to Constantinople. 2 centuries later, we know about 40 families, and 1 century later, about 40 families. So it was rather a decline. So of all southern Karaites, the only community that was prospering was that of Cairo. All others were gradually declining, or just disappearing, last day, Damascus. And the community that became gradually the world center of Karaites, or at least one of 2 world centers, along with Cairo, was Crimea, and became Crimea gradually. So Crimea, in this peninsula, we find the first reference to Karaite in the capital city of Crimean Khanate, which is called Solkhat. Later it was called Old Crim, and actually this city gave a name to the whole peninsula of Crimea. The first reference appears at the end of the 13th century. And at this time, as I told during my previous lecture about non-Karaite Jews in Crimea, there were also non-Karaites or Rabbinite Jews present in the same city. And during the 4th, 14th, and 15th century, we learned from historical sources about Karaite communities in a larger city of the peninsula. So in Kaffa, which is today Feodosia, Kirkyer, that became later, at that time, Kirkyer was the capital city, the place where Crimean Khans were living, but they left, everybody except for Karaites left in the 17th century, and after that the city was renamed to, started to be called Chufut Kale, that means in Turkish and in Crimean Tatar, Jewish fortress. So this became a center of Crimean Karaites. And Mangup, that later, that was also another place of Crimea. So in Crimea, in the mid-15th century, Crimea was divided between 3 powers. So the main part of Crimea was governed by Crimean Khanate, so a Muslim state that was founded after the Mongol invasion. And the southeast western part was still at that moment the independent Greek speaking and Greek governed province of Theodora, and the coastal part, the southern part, was governed by Genoese. So it was Genoese colony, Italian speaking authorities, and at the end at 1475, both these areas that corresponded to Greek or Italian possessions, they would became part of Ottoman Empire, and the Crimean Khanate became itself not a part of Ottoman Empire, but a vassal of this empire. And so at that moment, Karaites were living in all three parts, because Mangup is inside of Teodoro area. Kaffa was a famous, as a central city of Genoese possession. So, and Kirk Yer, Solhat were inside of the Muslim government Crimean Khanate. 1 century later, we learn about 5 cities in what was at that period Grand Duchy of Lithuania, where the Jewish residence was authorized. So these 5 cities were Troki, so today Trakai in Lithuania, Grodno and Brest, that today correspond to Belarus, Vladimir and Lutsk, that today correspond to the Volhynia part of the Ukraine. So in these documents, the privilege granted by Lithuanian Duke to Jews, there is no explicit mention about what kind of Jews are authorized to reside there and to have privileges. But from other documents, they learn that a majority, if not all, of Troki residents were Karaites. A big part, if not majority, or maybe at the beginning even all of Lutsk were Karaites as well, but we don't find any reference to Karaites in Grodno, Brest, and Vladimir. So from what we learned that, it's for documents of the next century. So in 15th century, we know, we learn from historical document, which was written 100 years after the first mention of Jews in Troki, that at that period, only Karaites are authorized to be regular residents. So if some non-Karaites or Rabbinite Jews could be present there, they were not authorized to reside permanently. In Lutsk, we learn from a document that one Karaite from Lutsk came to Ottoman, to Edirne, that was at that period a capital city of the Ottoman Empire. It was just a few years before the end of the Byzantine Empire and the moment before the moment Ottoman Empire took Constantinople. 100 years later, we learned that in Lutsk, the number of Karaites was approximately the same as the number of non-Karaites, but gradually their number diminished. The number, they were newcomers for Rabbinites, so Ashkenazic Jews who joined this community, and so gradually, of course, the number of Ashkenazic Jews became much more larger than the number of Karaites in Lutsk. In Kiev, we learn for 1841 about the presence of both Karaites and Rabbinites congregation, not just individual Jews, but congregation of both versions of Judaism in this city that at that period was part of the Grand Duchy of Lithuania. During the next centuries, so from mid-17th to 18th century, what is information we know from historical sources? Why I divided the whole period into different parts before and after mid-17th century. In mid-17th century, there were mass massacres of Jews in the territory of Poland and Grand Duchy of Lithuania by Cossacks led by Bogdan Khmelnytsky. And so during these pogroms, numerous communities disappeared, and not only among these communities, some were Karaites. So for Cossacks, or actually for all people living there, non-Jewish people, both Karaites or non-Karaites or Rabbanites were considered as Jews. And so this is why, of course, when there were massacres of Jews, Karaites were concerned and to the same degree as Rabbanites. And so for this reason, when we look into Lutsk, immediately after the massacres, we see that there were just 3 persons left in Lutsk. But when during the next century, the number becomes gradually greater, and in the mid-19th century, there were about 230 Karaites in Lutsk. Of course, there were thousands of Ashkenazic Jews in Lutsk and the Lutsk area at that period. But there was a new place, call it Halich. It is a place in what is later became part of Galicia. So actually the word Galicia comes from this city of Halich. And in this city, we learn about, at the start of the 17th century, about a small number of Karaites, 24, and a very few Rabbanites, but gradually the situation changes, and with the arrival of Ashkenazic Jews, Karaites become a minority, but still there were 160 Karaites in Halich at the start of the 20th century. And in Lithuania, in southern Lithuania, so Troki, the number of Karaites was about 500 at mid-19th century. And in northern Lithuania, so in Panevėžio area, and especially in the place called Novi Masta, we were about 200 Karaites. Actually, this became the main place of the Karaite residents in Lithuania at that period. And they actually represented the majority of local population. So this is what we know from historical sources. What can we learn about migration from names? And so from first of all, for Middle East. In the Middle East, the daily language of Jews, of Karaites, Jews who lived there for centuries, was in the territory of modern Iran, Persian, and another country, Arabic, for many centuries. And so it is not a surprise that when we learn about last name of some of these Karaites, there were no family names at that period, but some nicknames indicate from what area the person, actually a scholar, because we know only names of famous rabbis and the famous scholars, from where they came. So, for example, people called here are Arabic-based nicknames. All of them are based on toponyms. So from Iran, place names Al-Nahavandi, Al-Kumisi, Al-Basri is from Iraq. The most famous grammarian, Al-Kirkisani, we are not sure from which place, because there are 2 places that could give rise to this name, either one in Iraq and another in Syria. And in Egypt in 15th century, we find such scholars whose last name is Al-Maghribi, that means someone who came from North Africa, from Maghreb. And we are not sure whether the person really was born there. Maybe he traveled there, or but the most logical conclusion is that there were also Karaites in North Africa in Morocco at that period. And one of them came to Egypt and acquired the nickname Al-Maghribi. Al-Hiti is clear. It's someone from the city of Hit, where we know about the presence of Karaites. And we learn already in the 15th century about the name of Firuz. Firuz is a male Muslim name of Persian origin, first name used by males, but it became also used by first name, apparently, by Jews as well, and at least by Karaites, and it became also a family name. And in Damascus in 18th century, we also find some nicknames or last names that reveal the origin. For example, al-Baghdadi, of course, is very clear, someone who came from Baghdad. Al-Ajami in Arabic means Persian, so someone who came from the territory of modern Iran. And we find again the same last name, Firuz. So this is a migration of a family bringing the last name of Firuz from Egypt or from Persia, when we cannot be sure from where, to Damascus. Cairo. So in Cairo, the community, one of the oldest Karaite community of the world, the daily language for many centuries was Arabic. And so we find, what are the names with last name that we find? Firuz. We also find Cohen and Levy, common names in these communities. So we do not reveal from where these people came, but they still reveal the origin of these families, from where belonging to priestly or to caste or Levites. Many families actually, especially for both of them, Cohen and Levi, with common names in both in Cairo, for Cairo Karaites. Many names coincide with male names. So since in Cairo last names were acquired relatively recently, so most likely during the 19th century only. So some names, first names of the fathers, of the grandfathers, as it was usual for this area, became family names. And so we find family names based on Hebrew biblical names like Eliezer, but not only biblical. Many other names, just Hebrew, which are post-biblical, like Masliach, Nisim, Pesach, Yom Tov. Yom Tov in Arabic pronunciation, it is B, not V. And many other names, first name that became last names, which correspond to Arabic and male names that were borrowed by Jews, by Karaites, Karaite Jews, from their Muslim neighbors, like Abdullah, Abdel Wahed, Aslan, Darwish, Farag in the Egyptian Arabic pronunciation. In classical Arabic, it's Faraj, Hidr, Marzouk, etc. And other names are just based on Egyptian Arabic, like occupation, like Dabach, El Ghazar, Tahan, El Zayat, or nicknames like Abu Kamar, Gamil, so equivalent of standard Arabic Jamil, Tawil. And there are a few names which are based on Hebrew, like occupational El Nasi, with the Arabic article, but Hebrew word, noun, Shamas, Sofer. So all these words were part of the vernacular Judeo-Arabic language used in everyday life by Karaites of Cairo. And we also find such names like Kirimi, Kefili, Mangupi. These names reveal people, Karaites, who migrated to Cairo from Crimea, because Kirimi indicates directly the origin from Crimea. Kefili, it's Turkish name, Turkish or Crimean Tatar-based name with the suffix li, and based on the city of Kefe, which is the Turkish name for Kaffa, so today Feodosia, Mangupi. And just an example that illustrate how these names in Cairo were changing during this period. So we know about Musa Levi el-Dimashqi, who was the chief rabbi of Cairo Karaites during the second third of the 19th century. He was born in Jerusalem, and his name el-Damashqi just indicated that his father, or maybe his grandfather, came to Jerusalem from Damascus. So this means just someone from Damascus in Arabic. But his descendants who continued to live in Cairo, they changed his name and they acquired the name Al-Qudsi. And Al-Qudsi means someone from Jerusalem, in Arabic. So this way we see that their name was a new name adopted because the origin of their father or grandfather from Jerusalem. What is the link between Cairo and Damascus? One of the illustration about the migration between these two communities, they were closely related, comes from the analysis of first names used in this community. So in Cairo, in the list of in the total census of Cairo Karaites done at the end of the 19th century, we find 36 different male given names. They are mainly biblical or generally speaking Hebrew names, but 8 of them are Arabic. So Jews were Karaites were borrowing from their Muslim neighbors some of their given names. So they were very selective. It's just some names. It's not thousands of names that were thousands or not hundreds of names. Just a few Arabic names were borrowed. And of these 8 names, we find 5 that appears in the very small sample of documents about Karaites of Damascus. So the same name is first name is in Cairo, like Farag, or, well, in Damascus it would be Faraj, Fadla, Allah, Mansur, Mazuk, and Hidr. So clearly this common use of the same Arab names borrowed from Muslims indicate the close relationship and migration between these two communities. What about Constantinople or Istanbul? Here the community was very different. People were speaking Greek. So Greek was a daily language of Karaites of Constantinople and later of Istanbul. And actually, even then, Jews who were not Karaites, so when Rabbinite Jews, local Jews who were Roman Yots, they switched after the arrival of Sephardic Jews and Italian Jews, they gradually switched to Ladino, to Judeo-Spanish. Karaites of Constantinople, of Istanbul, continued to use Greek in their daily life. And what we see this from their given names. Actually, here I present a sample, as it is usual for various communities of Jews in different areas. Female names are the best evidence about the daily language and about the names, specific names used by this community. So a lot of female names based on Greek language, so like Fedra, Hursi, Uchrisi, Fumia, Kali, Kera, Manaka, Mikri, Panoria. The suffix, diminutive suffix ula of Greek was also borrowed, and like that we find Hanula, Hursula, Fumula. Another diminutive suffix opula appears in names based on Greek, like Archondopola, or names from the Bible, like Esteropola, Usaropola. And we find also a few male names also with these suffixes, like Aphendopola, diminutive of Greek based on Aphenda, or Eleaopola, it's a diminutive of Elia, Elijah. And what about surnames? Some surnames appear already in the 15th century in the community of Karaites founded by migrants from Edirne. So the most famous surname of this period, of course, is Bashiachi, which was the name of a very famous family of scholars, most important scholars of Karaites of the world during this period, during these 2 centuries. It is based on Turkish language. And so this is a very rare example of name in Istanbul of name of Karaites based on Turkish language, not on Greek, not on Hebrew. For example, Gibor is name based on Hebrew. During the next 2 centuries, we find Firuz again. So with a name that we found already, we met already when speaking about Cairo and about Damascus, but also new names which are known in other places like Begi, Fuki, Javiera, Iraka. Many of them are based on Greek. Like, for example, Shua, Javiera, Iraka, these are names based on Greek words that became common really here in Istanbul. And in 18th century, we find already few migrants from Crimea, like Kirimi, again, a name indicating explicitly origin from Crimea, and Agiz, it's a name based on a name from Crimea, a Turkic name from Crimea. And during the next 2 centuries, after Crimea became Russian, so after Ottomans lost Crimea, the numerous families of Karaites from Crimea, and not only Karaites, also Rabbanite Jews called Krimchak too, many of them migrated together with Ottomans to Istanbul. And so like that, starting with end of the 18th century, and especially after the mid-18th century of the Crimean War that was won by Turkey with England and France against Russia, many Karaites from Crimea came to Constantinople, to Istanbul. What about their last name in Crimea? So in the 14th century, in the city of Solkhat, so the capital city of the Crimean Khanate, there were no surnames yet. We see just either first name, patronymics, and some nicknames. And some of these nicknames are good good indicators of origin of these people. So we find one person called Parsi. So that means someone from Persia, so from modern Iran. One called Hager, so a proselyte to Judaism. We find already at that period Halevi, Cohen, so people of Cohen, of Levite origin. And we find also one person whose nickname is Adrianopoliti. So in Greek, someone who came from Adrianople, today Turkish city of Edirne. During the next century, and especially during the period between 1589 and 1731, we find in the tombstones inscription from Chufut Calais, so the main place where Crimean Karaites lived. multiple references to Karaites and members of their families who came from Istanbul, like Begi, Fuki, Gibor, Sinani, a very important family who, without any doubt, came also from Istanbul, Yaraka, that was mentioned. Most likely, we don't find explicit reference to Istanbul origin, but name like Firuz that appears again now there. There are more chances that the family came from Istanbul than the idea that they could come from Cairo or Damascus, which are much situated much far of too distant from Crimea in comparison to Istanbul. We find also Gabay, a name that was common in Istanbul, Yefet, which is name also found in Istanbul, and a very interesting name, Trendafil. Trendafil, it's not a name that is found in Istanbul, but it is Greek-based. In Greek, it means rose, and actually it was the first name, female first name, that appears here at this period for the first time. So because of the Greek language, the odds are high that this was also a migrant from a family that migrated at that moment or some generation before from Istanbul, where Jews continued to be Greek-speaking. We find one person with the name Shamli. The name Shamli just means in Crimean Tatar and Karaim and in Turkish, someone from Syria or someone from Damascus. We also find with a rather recent migration, maybe 19th century, Hajjar Masuda, with the name from Cairo, and also an interesting name, Michri. Michri, it's the local pronunciation of Hebrew word Mitzri, so someone from Egypt. So the name explicitly indicates the provenance from Egypt. And at that period, of course, we already find in 19th century, 20th century, numerous migrants from northern area, from Lithuania, Volhynia, and Galicia. So migrants from the north to Crimea. If we consider given names of Karaites, there is an interesting point that we can find. So in mid-15th century, in Theodoro Principality, that at that moment was still the last rump Byzantine state, and that became part of the Ottoman Empire very quickly after that moment, we find a tombstone to a woman whose given name is Ephrosinia, so Greek name, a Karaite woman with a Greek name. And this name was common enough because we find during next century multiple variants of this name in Karaite tombstones in Crimea. So in form Frosin, Firsin, Fersun, these are just Turkic variants of this originally Greek name. Interesting, this first name is not found in the Karaite community of Istanbul. So that means that most likely this name was not acquired, was not due to migration of Karaites from Istanbul. It's more likely a migration of either migration of Greek-speaking Karaites from other parts of the Ottoman Empire, or just a local community of Karaites who was present at this Theodora Principality. That was a Greek state at that moment. They were still speaking Greek, and so we used this name because this Greek was their daily language. And during the 17th, 18th century in Crimea, we find numerous other examples of Greek-based names like Archodopola, Fumia, with Fumula, which is a diminutive form of Fumia, Panorea, Eleopola. All this we can find on tombstones in Crimea. Often these are members of families from Istanbul, but not only. So we have direct link, thanks to this analysis of name, between a Greek-speaking community and between, globally speaking, between Crimea and Byzantine Empire, and particularly Istanbul. But local daily speaking language was not Greek, and gradually in all areas Greek disappeared, and it only Karaim idiom was spoken. Well, actually, a Karaim idiom is not more than just a Karaite version of Crimean Tatar language, which is a language close to Turkish, but different Turkic language. And so all names that were adopted locally, not all, but many names that were adopted locally during the 18th and 19th century, they are based mainly on this language, but not only, because there are many names, many families bearing name Cohen and Levy, so showing their origins. But also we have names like Hodjashu Tohtamish, which correspond to first names borrowed from local Crimean Tatar. We find some Hebrew names occupation, so Neyman, Rofe, Shamash, Sofer, all these words were part of the Karaim dialect of Crimean Tatar because they were daily used on daily basis. And other names are mainly based on Crimean Tatar or Karaim language. As again, I said, it's not a good, it's not proper to call it a separate language. It's really a Crimean Tatar language with some Hebrew words like Arabaji, Kabakchi, Kalpakchi, Babajan, Erinchik, etc., etc. So all these are names that were mainly acquired most likely during the 18th century. Maybe some of them even appeared in the 19th century, but they are based, these names do not show anything about the origin of the ancestors because they are based on the daily language of this community. The name Kaleli, Kafeli, Mangupi, they just show from what places people came. So from Kaleli means someone, from Kali, from Chufat Kale. So from the Crimean place names like Chufut Kale, Kafa, and Mangup. Kostini is more interesting because Kostini means someone from Constantinople. So again, a link to Constantinople. And we find also that Hebrew pronunciation, I mentioned already the name Mitri, which shows that there was a special way of pronunciation of Hebrew with Tsari pronounced ch, and this exactly the same pronunciation rule as for Krimchaks. So Rabbanites, Jews from the same area. From this, the most logical idea is that since during the 14th century, there was the most logical link is to Byzantine Empire. We know that in 12th century, there was numerous Karaites, about 20% of all Jews of Constantinople, they were Karaites. We also know that some 40 years later, there was a sack of Constantinople by Crusaders. So after that sack, Jewish community of Istanbul was greatly damaged, and both Rabbanites and Karaites congregation for some period they almost ceased to exist, and so some Karaites they moved to other places, especially to the rump states of Byzantine Empire. So Trebizond Empire, of which Crimea, southern Crimea, was part. So it's very logical to think that it was during this period, after also with a northern part of Crimea, central part became part of the Crimean Khanate, that Karaites came from different parts of the coastal Byzantine Empire to Crimea. We see that the correspondence in dates as very, the correlation in dates is very attractive. The first Karaites to appear in sources of Crimea, they appear in the capital city of the Crimean Khanate some 40 years after Mongol conquest. We can also, we speak about the way Karaites appeared in Crimea, there are two methods, two ways. One is migrations of persons. Of course, some Karaites from Byzantine Empire, they could migrate to Crimea, but there is also a second way. It could be migration of ideas, not of people. So there were some people who was professing Judaism who were living there, and due to some influential rabbis who were professing the Karaite version of Judaism, some of them could acquire become Karaites without migrating from other area. They could be just local and acquiring this version of Judaism because of the migration of real Karaites from Byzantine Empire. Or maybe some from Persia as well. We have seen that, not maybe, but for sure, some people, individual, were from Persia, some from Byzantine Empire. What about, so the last topic, and we will finish quickly. What about Northern Karaites, so in Grand Duchy of Lithuania? In the 15th century in Troki, we find the first reference to a name which is significant. A Hebrew document mentions someone whose last name is Politi. Politi is a Greek name for someone from Polis, so it's either from Adrianople or from Constantinople. Then in Slavic Christian documents from next century, from the 15th, 16th, 17th century, we find only typical Slavic forms of biblical given names. This is due also to the fact that these documents are written to a language which was ancestor of the modern Ukrainian and Belarusian, but was spelled according to the orthography which is closer to modern Russian. We find numerous forms of given names that are shared by local Karaites with local non-Karaite Jews or Rabbinites, and many first reference to hereditary names like Kobetsky, Wabanos, Malinovsky, Novitsky, Pozemsky, Shpak appear already in this period. All of them are based on Slavic words, and they have Slavic roots, they have Slavic suffixes. We don't see from the name any link to Crimea here. When during the next centuries, in 18th, 19th century, we find other names, again, none of them shows any direct link to Crimea or to other community of Karaites. For example, Kaplunovsky became a common name. It's based on Polish or Belarusian Kaplan, like a famous, very common Ashkenazic name, Kaplan, the same origin, a priest on Polish and Belarusian, meaning just replacing Kohen. Lopato, Robachevsky, again, they are based on Slavic words. Many patronymics like Apkovich, Ilyashevich, Lavrinovich, Yutkevich, Firkovich, they based on first names with Polish or Belarusian suffix. Some words based on, some names based on common nouns or Slavic common nouns like Gogol, Golub, Kukurychik, Rudy, Turchin. Turchin is more interesting because it means in Polish someone from Turkey. So it's only indication of some migration. And in Galicia, when all people professing Judaism, independently of their version of Judaism, Karaites or Ashkenazic Jews, were required to take names. All Karaites from Galicia, they took names based on their patronymics. So Józefovich, Leonovich, Mordkovich, Novachovich, Sulimovich, all these names are based on first names used by Karaites from this period. Again, these names do not betray anything about their origin because all of them sound Slavic. They are based on Slavic words and Slavic roots. So just from names, one could think that these people were speaking only Slavic languages in their daily life. And actually, it's not true. And we don't learn this from names. What we know from history? We know from history that during the 14th century, there were close political links between Grand Duchy of Lithuania, which is shown here, and Crimean Khanate, because during this time there was a kind of civil war between different khans with different branches of Crimean khans. Some of them were taken refuge, they were refugees in Lithuania. So Lithuanian princes were taken direct part in these conflicts internal to Crimean Khanate. And least but not last, there was at the end of 14th century a military campaign to Crimea of the Grand Duke of Vytautas to Crimea. And so the first references to Karaites in Crimea, in Lithuania, they appear during this period. According to oral tradition, Karaite legends speak about the Crimean roots of all these Karaites who lived during the next century in Lithuania and Poland. Modern territories of modern Lithuania and modern Ukraine. And most important, historical linguistics. Actually, we know from documents that were written by Karaites from Lithuania and from Poland that their daily language was a Turkic-based language. So it was related to Crimean Tatar language, but it is different from the Crimean Tatar languages. So the language spoken by Karaites in the daily basis of Karaites of Lithuania and Poland, it was another idiom. And so to what dialect it is most close? It appears, according to the results of studies by linguist, Turkologist, it appears that the closest language is the language which is described in the very famous document which is called Codex Cumanicus, and that was published by Christian Catholic missionaries in Venice at the beginning of the 14th century. And it was describing the language spoken by Crimean Tatar at that period. And another language to which the daily language of Karaites is close is the language spoken by Armenian Christians, the so-called Armeno-Kipchak language. It was spoken by Armenian, inside of Armenian congregations in Galicia, Podolia, so in what is today Western Ukraine. And for this language, we know that it is very close to medieval. So people came, Armenians came to this location from medieval Crimea, where was a large Armenian community until the 20th century. So what we learn from that is actually the language spoken on the daily basis by Karaites from Lithuania and Poland, and so modern Western Ukraine, it was the language that archaic language that formally centuries ago was spoken in Crimea. And so because the community was not, the number of people living in this community was rather small, and because this community was totally endogamous, were very closely separate, they are totally separate from local non-Karaite, they continued and they kept these archaic features for centuries. So there is, like that, there is no doubt that Karaites from Lithuania and from Poland, their ancestors came to this area from Crimea. So just last thing, what are actually the names that are shared in various Karaite communities? Very few. Surname, only one actually, Firuz. It is found in Damascus, Cairo, Istanbul, Crimea. And given name, just one given name, very specific, Yafet. It is the Karaite version of Japheth, biblical name. But even if it is a biblical name, for example, other groups of Jews were never using this. We don't find it this name used by Sephardic, Mizrahi, or Ashkenazic Jews. But for Karaites, we find the first reference in Basra, not today in Iraq. It was a very famous at that period Karaite biblical commentator, Yefet Ben Ali, 10th century. And then during the next century, we find the same given name used in Cairo, in Crimea, in Lithuania. So this also is a trace, one of the rare traces of migrations of Karaites between different countries. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Beider. That was really so interesting and informative. We do have some questions in the Q&A, and we have about 10 to 15 minutes if you have the time to go through them.
Okay. Are Karaites and Karaims the same group? Yeah, actually, Karaites is the English word typically used in historical works written in the English language, and Karaim is usually the word used in English only for the language, but of course in all Slavic languages and in the word, the equivalent is, it is totally equivalent of Karaites. Why did Hitler consider the Karaites not real Jews? Well, it is a long story, but to keep it short, starting with the beginning of the 20th century, due to the efforts of Shapshal, who was a leader, Karaite leader at that period, and who was very important in the for Karaites of Crimea and Poland and Lithuania. There was a new tendency, a new trend to tell internally to Karaites of just this area, not to Karaites of Egypt, for example, or not to Karaites of Iraq, or even to Karaites of Istanbul, that Karaites from Crimea and Lithuanian Poland, it's not a version of Judaism, but it is a separate religion. This is the first point. And secondly, that ethnically, these people are not descendants of Jews, but they are local, ethnically Turkish people, Turkic people who just started to use this religion. Well, this was a ideology. We don't find any corroboration direct corroboration for this. We don't find any direct refutation against this either, but we have multiple indirect evidence like those I presented today about numerous families being clearly of Jewish origin who came to this area from different places. But the movement was so quick and so strong that very quickly it spread out to all this community. And at the moment, Nazis occupied Soviet Union. At that period, it was a most common idea for local Karaites. And so there was a question that was asked by ideologists, German ideologists, to most famous Polish Jewish historians of that time. For example, Meir Balaban was one of them, and Itzhak Schipper was another one. We were at that moment in Warsaw Ghetto, and the question was, are the Karaites Jews or non-Jews? And even if Balaban thought, and in his previous writing, he was writing about them being of Jewish origin, in these circumstances, he said they're non-Jews. And so like that, there was a Karaites were spared from massacres. So Krimchaks, almost all of them were murdered by Karaites, survived because of this what I described. Could Ethiopian Jews in Africa or in Israel be considered the Karaites also? No, there is no link between Karaites and Ethiopian Jews. The question is about any link that could exist between the name Manaka, that I mentioned as a female given name of Greek origin, and the surname Menaker. There is no link except for a phonetic one, because Menaker is a purely Ashkenazic name based on a Hebrew word, a specific Hebrew occupation, someone so it's a specific Hebrew occupation name from based on Hebrew and Yiddish word. And so no link at all about with the Greek first name Manaka used by Karaites. It's just a coincidence, phonetic coincidence. Are Karaites tombstones different from the Rabbinite tombstone? Surely, yeah. The answer is yes. But I'm not a specialist of that. But usually the cemeteries were separate. So we have separate cemeteries for Rabbinites in Crimea and for Karaites in Crimea. In Istanbul, there was a separate Karaite cemetery as well. For some early, when I studied names present at this Karaite cemetery, I was able to see that some of people who were buried there, they were Sephardic Jews or Romaniot Jews, but they were minority. A big majority were really Karaites. They were professing this Karaite version of Judaism, and usually they were really the tombstones appear on the Karaite cemetery of Istanbul. What were some of common Karaite surnames from Galicia? The slide did not display properly. Well, it was the last line, excuse me, and I see that I have some problem with slideshow. I'm not touching the screen, but it is moving itself. I don't know to what it is due. I think the script is sensitive to the air coming from my mouth. I don't know why. But the Karaite names from Galicia, it is just about 10 names, and all of them are Polish based patronymics. So Leonovich, Abrahamovich, Samuelovich, Zachariashevich, etc. So Shulimovich, a very curious name, Shulimovich, because of course Karaites were not pronounced in Hebrew like Ashkenazic Jews. So for them, Shalom was pronounced the same way as for the Sephardic Jews. So Shalom, not Sholem like for Litvaks, and not Shulim like for Polish and Ukrainian Ashkenazic Jews. But the name is not Shalomovich, it is Shulimovich. It does not mean that Karaites were pronouncing their first name as Shulim. It's mainly, I think, mean that the scribe who wrote this name in the register, he was much more familiar with the Ashkenazic names than with the Karaites names. This is why the name written was Shulimovich, not Shalomovich, as it would be. Was there any genetic research done for Karaites versus Ashkenazi Sephardic Jews? Certainly, the answer is yes, but I'm not an expert to tell whether these studies were carried out without any ideological bias because of the evident, very easy bias that can exist between people who are adhering to different, totally opposing approaches to the Karaite history. So the large majority of people who are Karaites themselves from Crimea, Lithuania, Poland, that believe that they are not, they have nothing to do with Jews, ethnically and so genetically as well, and other people who can be also very strong adherents of the opposite idea. I'm never one or other. I just tried to show you what can be learned by someone who is external to this polemics. So I'm not polemical at all. So this is why I cannot say whether we can consider the results of this some small genetic analysis where we can be confident about the accurate the method that they were accurate and not biased by ideology. Will the revision list for the towns in Belarus list if someone is Karaite versus a regular Jewish, so we can say Ashkenazic individual? I'm not sure. I'm not sure at all, because, for example, even when I was studying documents written by Karaites themselves, for example, from Lithuania, end of the 18th century, there are some letters that were published either in the translation or in Hebrew. And so in these letters, Karaites, Lithuanian Karaites themselves, very often they call themselves Jews. So for external, for Christians, usually they were Jews. And the difference, of course, there are some censuses already, for example, in the 16th centuries, there were separate censuses in Lutsk for Karaites and Rabbinites. So both were considered Jews, but these were two independent groups of Jews. And so I'm not sure at all that in the censuses there will be explicit indication that Karaites will appear as Karaites. Most likely, I think in many places they can appear just as Jews.
And Dr. Beider, maybe we'll do just one more because in the interest of
Yeah,
time.
okay, okay. How are Karaites considered in Israel? Well, Karaites who are living in Israel, a large majority of them came from Cairo, and also the descendants of all families that migrated from Hit, the city not far from Baghdad, plus a few families, for example, Kefeli families, a family from former Soviet Union. So Karaites living in Israel consider themselves usually, if not all, they consider themselves as Karaite Jews. And actually, all studies published by Egyptian Karaites, history of Karaites Jews. It's not history of Karaites. So there is no ambiguity for them. For Karaites living in Israel, they are Jews. And for other Israeli, it depends on the person, certainly. But, well, this is already, again, it's a politics, ideology, etc. So it's not my domain. Okay, maybe just one, if... last question. Is there any connection between Karaites and Romagnots? I think so. I think so because for me, as I said, I see for Karaites from Lithuania and Poland, for me, there is no doubt that they came from Crimea. For Crimean Karaites, there is little doubt about a very important part of their ancestors that they came from the Byzantine Empire, and primarily from Constantinople, so Istanbul and other places in what was Ottoman Empire, so what is now Turkey. Again, there are some examples of migrants from Persia, but they are rather exceptional. So since they came primarily, for me, to Crimea and to Lithuania from Crimea, from the Byzantine Empire, and of course, Karaites of Byzantine Empire itself, they were already here in place for centuries, and so they were using Greek language in their daily life until the 20th century at least. So we can consider them as descendants of Byzantine Jews. And so Byzantine Jews, there were two parts of them, two groups of them, one who were Rabbinites, so what we call today Romagnots, so that were respecting Talmud, oral tradition, globally speaking, and others that were rejecting oral tradition, and so we were following the Karaite version of Judaism. So these were two sister communities that were in very close relationship, for example, during the 15th and 16th century, there were yeshivas in Edirne, in which there were students, Karaite students of Rabbinite rabbis, and there were permanent exchanges of ideas, etc. So this is why this very similar given names for female as well. So I think it's just Karaites of Istanbul, of Crimea, of big part of Crimea and Lithuania and Poland. Their ancestors all came from Byzantine Empire, and so they are brothers, or in some sense, of Romagnot. Of course, for Karaites from Cairo or from Hit in Baghdad, or formerly from Damascus, there is no relationship to Romagnot at all. They are just groups which were never Greek-speaking, with Arabic speaking for centuries, and so we were totally isolated from Romanians. But for Crimea, Istanbul, and Lithuanian Poland, yes, there is clearly a cultural and maybe even most likely ethnic genetic link to Romania, between Romanians and Karaites.
Dr. Beider, thank you very much. As always, this has been so illuminating. We really learn a lot. I always learn a lot. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Dr. Beider's next lecture will take place next week. Topic of Romaniot Jews, their names and history. And then the series will wrap up the following week on July 3rd with the Jews of Syria, Iraq, and Egypt, their names and history. That had been rescheduled from last month. Hopefully by the end of today or tomorrow, we will send out an email, which, as I mentioned, will have a survey link to please provide feedback about the program, and also a link to the recording, and also a link to register for next week's program. So Dr. Beider, thank you again. Thank you everyone for joining us, and wishing everybody a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.